Hey, you know more of this. 'Tis like the howling of Irish wolves against the moon. Welcome back for season 2 of Romeo on Shakespeare. I was really hoping to do the rest of these episodes without interruption, but as you can see, these country copulatives just showed up pleading for help and, well, yada, 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 they're still coming. Rosalind, would you please wait outside? Orlando, I will help you if I can because I know that you're a novice when it comes to romantic matters, and I too remember when I thought love was only true in fairy tales and felt as you do now that it was meant for someone else, but not for me. I get that as the youngest son of Sir Roland de Boys, you feel like your eldest brother Oliver was out to get thee, and I'm sure that's the way it seemed when he refused to educate you as your father instructed in his will and treated you like a peasant. I'm not surprised at all that you felt like disappointment haunted all your dreams. You said you thought love was more or less a given thing, and it seemed like the more your sweat you gave, the less love you got. Naturally, when you first saw Rosalind, you probably thought, what's the use in trying to woo the banished duke's daughter? All you'll get is pain. And I'm sure you were skeptical when she said after your wrestling match that you've overthrown more than your enemies. After all, in the past, when thou needed sunshine, thou got rain. But oh, then I saw her face when she read your love verses, saying that her affection hath an unknown bottom, like the Bay of Portugal. And now, I'm a believer, and there's not a trace of doubt in my mind. So if I were you, Señor Love, I'd be saying, I'm in love. And I'm a believer, and I couldn't leave her if I tried. In the 1995 film version of Jane Austen's classic, Pride and Prejudice, we see how she masterfully created timeless and endearing characters by showing us different sides of them as they interact with one another. And I love Mr. Bennet's comment, what do we live for but to make sport for our neighbors and to laugh at them in our turn? With these observations in mind, it seems certain that Jane Austen must have been influenced by William Shakespeare's romantic comedy As You Like It, and learned how she too could make her readers fall in love with her characters who fall in love with each other. So let's take a look at the plot. Duke Senior has been usurped and exiled by his younger brother Frederick. Duke Senior's daughter Rosalind has been allowed to remain at court because she is best friends with her cousin Celia, Frederick's only child. Orlando is the youngest son of the late gentleman Sir Roland de Boys, who is coming of age and seeks to prove himself by wrestling Charles, the heavily favored court champion. But just before the wrestling match, Duke Frederick urges Celia and Rosalind to persuade Orlando from wrestling, since the odds are stacked against him. But Orlando and Rosalind fall in love almost at first sight, although they don't disclose their feelings to each other right away. Even though Orlando wins the wrestling match, he's forced to flee his home after being persecuted by his older brother Oliver, who despite his father's wishes, has not educated Orlando to be anything but a peasant. Frederick becomes angry with his niece and banishes Rosalind from court. However, Celia and Rosalind decide to flee together into the forest of Arden, where her father, the usurped Duke Senior, now lives like Robin Hood with some of his courtiers. In order to protect themselves from assailants, Rosalind disguises herself as a young man going by the name of Ganymede, and Celia disguises herself as a poor country girl named Aliena. The two women also bring with them the court fool, Touchstone, to be a comfort to them. Meanwhile, in the forest of Arden, the exiled duke is now living with some of his men, including the melancholy Jaques, a malcontent figure who weeps over the slaughter of a deer. However, Rosalind and Celia, now disguised as Ganymede and Aliena and Touchstone, do not immediately encounter the Duke and his companions and are now starving for food when they meet Corin, an impoverished tenant shepherd, and they offer to buy his master's rustic cottage. At the same time, since Orlando has learned from his elderly but loyal servant Adam that his eldest brother Oliver is planning to kill him, Orlando and Adam decide to hide out in the forest of Arden, but not long after they get there, Adam's age and hunger bring him close to death. As Orlando searches for food, he stumbles upon the banished Duke Senior and his men who come to his rescue. Once he's fed, Orlando begins posting simplistic poems to Rosalind on trees. Rosalind, who is also in love with Orlando, finds and reads his poetry, but does not know who's written them. However, Celia knows, and she tells her cousin. Right after that, Rosalind, disguised as Ganymede, runs into Orlando and pretends to counsel him to cure him of being in love. Ganymede says that he will pretend to be Rosalind so that he and Orlando can act out their courtship. During these sessions, Rosalind continuously demonstrates the many moods of a woman in love, and Orlando struggles with punctuality and understanding women. However, Rosalind makes it clear to Celia just how deeply she's in love with Orlando. Meanwhile, the stuck-up shepherdess Phoebe, with whom the young shepherd Silvius is in love, has fallen in love with Ganymede, who is really Rosalind in disguise, even though Ganymede continually insists that he is not interested in Phoebe. At the same time, Touchstone becomes very attracted to the simple goatherd Audrey and pursues her, but he realizes he will have to marry her first. William is another countryman and also interested in marrying Audrey, but is scared off by Touchstone, who threatens to kill him 150 ways. While walking through the forest, Orlando comes across his brother Oliver, who is sleeping, and rescues him from a lioness, causing Oliver to repent for mistreating Orlando. Orlando, however, is injured in the animal attack and sends Oliver to find Ganymede, Rosalind, and tell him why he's late for their meeting. Meanwhile, Oliver meets Aliena, Celia's false identity, and instantly falls in love with her, and they agree to marry, leaving his entire inheritance to his youngest brother. Orlando is happy for them, but laments that he does not have his Rosalind. Next we see Silvius, Phoebe, Ganymede, and Orlando gathered together, carrying on, pining for the person each one of them loves. Finally, Ganymede says that the next day he will resolve their love agonies by having Orlando promise to marry Rosalind and Phoebe promising to marry Silvius if she decides not to marry Ganymede. When Phoebe discovers that Ganymede is actually Rosalind, a woman, she agrees to marry Silvius. Rosalind is reunited with her father, and Orlando is overjoyed to see Rosalind. Orlando and Rosalind, Oliver and Celia, Silvius and Phoebe, and Touchstone and Audrey are all about to marry when Jaques de Bois, the middle brother of Oliver and Orlando, shows up and announces that Duke Frederick has repented his faults and has returned the dukedom to his legitimate brother and adopted a religious life. The ever-melancholy Jaques decides not to return to court, but instead wants to stay in the forest and study a religious life as well. Finally, Rosalind delivers an epilogue commending the play to both men and women in the audience. When we return, we'll look at some of the remarkable characters in As You Like It. Before we dive in, I want to address a question I got from Matthew in Kingston, Pennsylvania about one of the props on the Romeo and Shakespeare set. He said, "It looks like a wedge of cheese." Well, actually, this is the Trivial Pursuit Shakespeare edition. So I highly recommend that you pick it up if you want to test your knowledge of Shakespeare. Now, let's get into the characters in As You Like It. We'll start with the brothers. There's Oliver, Jaques, and Orlando, They're the sons of the late Sir Roland de Boys, who was a gentleman beloved by the now usurped Duke Senior and the enemy of the current Duke Frederick. Orlando is the youngest and strongest of the three, who falls in love almost at first sight with Rosalind, but knows not how to woo her. Duke Senior was a good ruler who was exiled in the Forest of Arden after his evil brother Frederick took over his dukedom. Duke Senior had a daughter named Rosalind, and Duke Frederick had a daughter named Celia. These two cousins are best friends and inseparable. Despite Duke Frederick's bad behavior, the two of them are loyal to each other and travel to the Forest of Arden after Duke Frederick banishes Rosalind. Rosalind is the lead character in the play, who becomes completely uninhibited when she disguises herself as Ganymede, a pretty male youth who counsels Orlando on how to woo his Rosalind, even though he doesn't know Ganymede is Rosalind. Celia also disguises herself as a poor shepherdess named Aliena in order to avoid assailants while traveling in the forests. Touchstone is the court fool who accompanies Rosalind and Celia into the forest, where he is smitten with Audrey, a goatherd, primarily by his lusty desires, and admits that he's even looking for a good excuse to leave her after they marry. Touchstone is very witty and not afraid to speak his mind, and Shakespeare uses him to interact with many other characters and serve as an observer and mocker of human behavior, including his own. Jaques is one of Duke Senior's lords, who accompanies the Duke into exile, but is almost always melancholy. He is best known for delivering one of Shakespeare's most famous soliloquies, The 7 Ages of Man, which begins, "All the world's a stage." He also serves as a foil to Orlando, Duke Senior, Rosalind, and Touchstone. Corin is a wise old shepherd who buys his master's sheep cottage with Rosalind and Celia's money and counsels a good young shepherd named Silvius, who is madly in love with Phoebe, a plain but stuck-up shepherdess. Rosalind is very outspoken and takes great joy in chiding Phoebe for being so scornful to her doting admirer Silvius. And as Touchstone discovers when he asks Corin, "Hast thou any philosophy in you?" he is a natural philosopher, saying, "No more than I know that the more one sickens, the worse at ease he is, and that he that wants money, means, and content is without 3 good friends, that the property of rain is to wet, and fire to burn, that good pastures makes fat sheep, and that a great cause of the night is lack of the sun." When we get back, we'll look at some of the plot devices and memorable scenes in As You Like It. Shakespeare uses the wrestling match as a plot device, first so that Orlando can meet Rosalind, and second, to prove his worth as a suitor, and the fact that he defeats the heavily favored Charles makes the scene even more memorable. It is odd that Orlando can speak to Rosalind and Celia before the wrestling match, but not afterwards, due to his passionate and sudden infatuation with her. Having a good monarch overthrown by a bad one sets up the scene for the underdog to be revenged or justice to be served. We also see this in Richard II, Henry VI Part 3, The Tempest, Hamlet, and Macbeth. And let's not forget women disguising themselves as men with comic results. We've seen this with Viola in Twelfth Night, Portia in The Merchant of Venice, Julia in Two Gentlemen of Verona, and to a lesser degree, Imogen in Cymbeline. But in As You Like It, we have an added twist. We have a boy actor playing a woman character, Rosalind, who is playing a boy character, Ganymede, who is pretending to be a woman, Rosalind. If you can't find anything funny about this plot device, you're just not trying. Once Rosalind is in disguise as her alter ego, Ganymede, her personality bursts forth and leads to many memorable scenes as she interacts with Orlando and the proud Phoebe as she scorns her doting shepherd Silvius. Just listen to this. "And why, pray you, who might be your mother, that you insult, exalt, and all at once over the wretched. What though you have no beauty, as by my faith I see no more in you than without candle may go dark to bed, must you be therefore proud and pitiless? Why, what means this? Why do you look on me? I see no more in you than in the ordinary of nature's sail work. Odds my little life, I think she means to tangle my eyes too. No, faith, proud mistress, hope not after it. 'Tis not your inky brows, your black silk hair, your bugle eyeballs, nor your cheek of cream that can entain my spirits to your worship. You, foolish shepherd, wherefore do you follow her, like foggy south puffing with wind and rain? You are 1,000 times a proper man than she a woman. 'Tis such fools as you that makes the world full of ill-favored children. 'Tis not her glass, but you that flatter her, and out of you she sees herself more proper than any of her lineaments can show her. But, mistress, know yourself, down on your knees, and thank heaven fasting for a good man's love, for I must tell you, friendly in your ear, sell when you can, you are not for all markets. That is my all-time favorite rebuke, followed only by Viola's to Olivia in Twelfth Night, when Olivia shows her face and says, "'Tis not well done," and Viola says, "Excellently done, if God did all." No doubt, Rosalind's outspoken criticism of others who throw away love when she yearns for Orlando is one of the chief reasons why As You Like It is my all-time favorite Shakespeare play. The final scene, when all four couples are joined together to marry, and all the confusion is cleared up, tops off this magnificent romantic comedy, leaving the audience thoroughly entertained and satisfied. It's a brand new season, and I've got some brand new themes to explore. With all the wonderful dialogue that's woven throughout this entire play, it's no surprise at all that As You Like It has remained one of Shakespeare's most enduring comedies. But unlike some of Shakespeare's other plays like Hamlet, Macbeth, or Henry IV Parts 1 and 2, many of the best lines in As You Like It are the result of interactive dialogue rather than long speeches. First, let's start off with this witty exchange between Jaques and Orlando, demonstrating polite and playful and respectful disagreement between two people who don't care that much for each other, but have been thrown together by circumstance. Jaques starts out, "I thank you for your company, but good faith, I had as lief have been myself alone." Orlando replies, "And so had I, but yet, for fashion's sake, I thank you too for your society. God buy you. Let's meet as little as we can. I do desire we may be better strangers. I pray you, mar no more trees with writing love songs in their barks. I pray you, mar no more of my verses with reading them ill-favorably. Rosalind is your love's name. Yes, just. I do not like her name. There was no thought of pleasing you when she was christened. What stature is she of? Just as high as my heart. You are full of pretty answers. The worst fault you have is to be in love. 'Tis a fault I will not change for your best virtue. I am weary of you. By my troth, I was seeking a fool when I found you." Orlando replies, "He is drowned in the brook. Look but in, and you shall see him. There I shall see mine own figure, which I take to be either a fool or a cipher. I'll tarry no longer with you. Farewell, good Signor Love. I am glad of your departure. Adieu, good Monsieur Melancholy." If that were not enough, the scene continues with Touchstone mocking Rosalind, who was reading Orlando's poetry. But he is a fool, and he can get away with making fun of her, and he doesn't miss this opportunity to do so. He continues with his own rhymes. "If a heart do lack a hind, let him seek out Rosalind. If the cat will after kind, so be sure will Rosalind. Winter garments must be lined, so must slender Rosalind. They that reap must sheaf and bind, then to cart with Rosalind. Sweetest nut hath sourest rind, such a nut is Rosalind. He that sweetest rose will find must find love's prick and Rosalind. This is the very false gallop of verses. Why do you infect yourself with them? Peace, you dull fool, I found them on a tree. Truly the tree yields bad fruit. Just as Shakespeare does with the nurse and Juliet in Romeo and Juliet, and Lucetta and Julia in The Two Gentlemen of Verona, Celia knows that it is Orlando who is writing the love verses and hanging them on trees before Rosalind does. But she deliberately withholds the details of what she knows for as long as possible, partially to suspend Rosalind's anticipation and to take the opportunity to tease her beloved cousin. But in doing so, we get treated to some of the best dialogue in the play. Celia says, "It is young Orlando that tripped up the wrestler's heels and your heart both in an instant. Alas the day! What shall I do with my doublet and hose? What did he when thou saw'st him? What said he? How looked he? Wherein went he? What makes he here? Did he ask for me? Where remains he? How parted he with thee? And when shalt thou see him again? Answer me in one word." And Celia, teasing, says, "You must borrow me Gargantua's mouth first. 'Tis a word too great for any mouth of this age's size. To say aye and no to these particulars is more than to answer in a catechism." Rosalind says, "Looks he as freshly as he did the day he wrestled? I found him under a tree, like a dropped acorn. It may well be called Jove's tree, when it drops forth such fruit. Give me audience, good madam." There he lay, stretched along like a wounded knight. Though it be pity to see such a sight, it well becomes the ground. He was furnished like a hunter. Oh, ominous, he comes to kill my heart. I would sing my song without a burden, thou bring'st me out of tune. Do you not know I am a woman? When I think, I must speak. This is Shakespeare at his best, not being concerned with being labeled a sexist 400 years later, but merely displaying the folly of a young woman in love and her best friend's natural tendency to tease her about it. Shakespeare's use of witty banter in this play between his characters is what really sets it apart as a masterpiece and demonstrates to his audience that if they and you are in need of a good laugh, here's a bunch of very likable characters ready and willing to entertain and amuse you as you like it. This play is also rich in an abundance of references to everything under the sun. Please keep in mind that most authorities agree that Shakespeare never left England in his entire life, and there's no evidence to suggest that he did. Yet he possessed an extensive knowledge of many different facts about history, geology, mythology, literature, and the Bible, and he made great use of all that throughout the entire play, and does it so effortlessly it almost appears like he's showing off. For example, listen to some of these references. At the wrestling match, Rosalind says, "Now Hercules be thy speed, young man." Hercules is a Roman version of Heracles, son of Jupiter, known for his incredible strength and far-ranging adventures. Rosalind says, "I'll have no worse a name than Jove's own page, therefore call me Ganymede." According to legend, Ganymede was the most beautiful of all mortals, so much so that Zeus, or Jove, fell in love with him, which is kind of what happens when Orlando meets Ganymede and pretends Ganymede is Rosalind, which he is. Oliver is told that the banished duke lives in the forest of Arden with many merry men, like the old Robin Hood of England, and fleet the time carelessly as they did in the Golden World. The source of this English folklore comes from anonymous 13th and 14th century balladeers. Celia says to Rosalind, "You must borrow me Gargantua's mouth first." This is a reference to a creation by Francois Rabelais, who lived in the late 1400s and created satirical characters, including the giant Gargantua. Jacques says, "There is sure another flood toward, and these couples are coming to the ark." This is a biblical reference from Genesis about Noah's Ark, but he made another earlier one when he said, "I'll sleep, or if I cannot, I'll rail against all the firstborn of Egypt." This is a reference to the 10th plague that God sent against Egypt in order to get Ramses to let the Hebrew slaves go. And one more from Jake when he is describing his reaction to listening to Touchtone, he says, "My lungs began to crow like Chanticleer." This is a reference to a rooster in one of Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. Not too shabby for a playwright with only 7 years of formal education who never traveled outside of his own country. All right, now let's continue with another brand new theme, and that is escapism. Shakespeare chose the Forest of Arden for his setting throughout most of As You Like It to contrast it against the corruption of courtly life as compared with the simplicity of country folk in an idyllic setting of fantasy. It also became the perfect opportunity for these characters to discover who they really are once they're freed from the conventions of society. First, let's hear from the banished Duke Senior. "Now, my co-mates and brothers in exile, hath not old custom made this life more sweet than that of painted pomp? Are not these woods more free from peril than the envious court? Here feel we not the penalty of Adam, the season's difference, as the icy fang and churlish chidings of the winter's wind, which, when it bites and blows upon my body, even till I shrink with cold, I smile and say, this is no flattery. These are counselors that feelingly persuade me what I am. Sweet are the uses of adversity, which, like the toad, ugly and venomous, wears yet a precious jewel in his head. And this our life, exempt from public haunt, finds tongues in trees, brooks in the running brooks, sermons in stones, and good in everything." And Amiens says, "I would not change it." And Celia scolds Rosalind for being too severe with Orlando in his love-curing sessions and says, "You have simply misused our sex in your love prate. We must have your doublet and hose plucked over your head and show the world what the bird hath done to her own nest." But this is when Rosalind admits to herself and to Celia how hopelessly she is in love with Orlando. "Oh, coz, my pretty little coz, that thou didst know how many fathom deep I am in love. But it cannot be sounded. My affection hath an unknown bottom, like the Bay of Portugal." I also want to address the theme of identity in this play. Having watched it about 17 times now, I've noticed that quite often the characters do not address each other by name. It's almost as if their identities have been taken over. For example, Rosalind is called Ganymede, pretty youth, and cousin. Celia is called Aliena, coz, and daughter. Adam is called old dog and good old man. Orlando is called youth, younger brother, forester, Sir Roland's youngest son, and senior love. Touchtone is called fool, wit, motley, and roynish clown, which means mangy, coarse, or troublesome. Duke Senior is called the banished duke, or my lord, and Jaques is referred to as Monsieur Traveller by Rosalind, Monsieur Melancholy by Orlando, and Monsieur Whatchacallit by Touchtone. As you could see, the forest setting allows these characters the ability to escape their identities and permits their true natures the freedom to shine through. If I have one criticism of As You Like It, it's that there are just so many great lines in it that there's no way to cover every single one of them without just reading the entire play straight through. But here are some of the best lines and some of my favorites. Orlando in Act 1, Scene 2. Thus must I, from the smoke into the smother, from tyrant duke unto a tyrant brother. Rosalind in Act 1, Scene 3. Beauty provoketh thieves sooner than gold. Also Rosalind. Why then can one desire too much of a good thing? And Rosalind in Act 3, Scene 5. I pray you, do not fall in love with me, for I am falser than vows made in wine. By the way, the phrase forever and a day originated in this play. It's Orlando in Act 4, Scene 1. Touchstone says in Act 5, the fool doth think he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool. Probably the most profound line in the whole play. In Orlando, Act 5, oh, how bitter a thing it is to look into happiness through another man's eyes. And Orlando is asked by Rosalind, but are you so much in love as your rhymes speak? And he says, neither rhyme nor reason can express how much. By the way, Dromio also uses this phrase in A Comedy of Errors. Sylvius has some of the most beautiful poetry in the entire play in Act 5, Scene 2, but it's hard to appreciate just how good it is because it's interrupted by Phoebe, Orlando, and Rosalind chiming in. But listen to it straight through after Phoebe asks Sylvius, good shepherd, tell this youth what 'tis to love. And he answers, it is to be all made of sighs and tears. It is to be all made of faith and service. It is to be all made of fantasy, all made of passion, and all made of wishes, all adoration, duty and observance, all humbleness, all patience and impatience, all purity, all trive, all observance, and so am I for Phoebe. You can't help but feel that Phoebe really should give Sylvius a chance because he obviously understands what real love is all about, and the others seem to agree with him. And of course, the most famous verses in the entire play, and almost Shakespeare's most famous words, next to Hamlet's to be or not to be soliloquy, are that of Jaques' famous 7 Ages of Man speech in Act 2, Scene 7. Duke Senior says, thou seest, we are not all alone unhappy. This wide and universal theatre presents more woeful pageants than the scene wherein we play. And Jaques says, all the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts, his acts being 7 ages. At first the infant, mewling and puking in the nurse's arms, noticed how Jaques methodically de-romanticizes each age in contrast to the Duke's optimistic perspective. Then the whining schoolboy with his satchel and shining morning face, creeping like snail unwillingly to school. And then the lover, sighing like furnace, with a woeful ballad made to his mistress's eyebrow. He's mocking lover's eccentricities. Then a soldier full of strange oaths, and bearded like the pard. That's pard, not bard. Pard as in leopard. Jealous in honor, sudden and quick in quarrel, seeking the bubble reputation even in a cannon's mouth. In other words, he'll take glory even if it's fleeting, kind of like Hotspur would do. And then the justice, in fair round belly with good capon lined. In other words, his pockets are filled with bribes. With eyes severe and beard of formal cut, full of wise saws and modern instances. And so he plays his part. The 6th age shifts into the lean and slippered pantaloon with spectacles on nose and pouch on side, his youthful hose well saved, a world too wide for his shrunk shank, and his big manly voice turning again towards childish treble, pipes and whistles in his sound. Last scene of all that ends this strange, eventful history is second childishness and mere oblivion. sans teeth, sans eyes, sans taste, sans everything. By the way, be sure to check out Sophie Stone of Shakespeare's Globe performing The Seven Ages of Man on YouTube. I've watched the short video over and over again, and I've never seen anyone do this performance more justice. I promise you, you will not be disappointed. When we return, we'll look at some of the major turning points and correlations between As You Like It and the other Shakespeare plays. In As You Like It, there are several key turning points which set all the action in motion. Certainly the first one is Duke Senior, who has been usurped and banished by his brother Frederick. Duke Senior's decision to live in the Forest of Arden and escape the corrupt society of the dukedom sets the escapism in motion. Next, we have Orlando's chance meeting of Rosalind at the wrestling match, in which he is victorious. This gives us our lovers who spend the rest of the play longing to be together. Then we have Duke Frederick banishing Rosalind and Celia deciding to go along with her to the Forest of Arden. And when Adam tells Orlando that his brother Oliver is going to try to kill him, the pair also goes into the Forest of Arden, leading to the inevitable meeting with Rosalind disguised as Ganymede. There are plenty of correlations to the other Shakespeare plays in As You Like It. Let's start with usurping brothers. In The Tempest, we see Antonio usurp his brother Prospero, and in Hamlet, Claudius not only usurps King Hamlet, but he poisons him as well. And if we want to talk about evil brothers, we can also add Richard of Richard III to the list. When it comes to banishment, we see it happen in Coriolanus, to Alcibiades in Timon of Athens, to Romeo in Romeo and Juliet, and to Henry Bolingbroke in Richard II. In fact, the optimistic advice John of Gaunt gives his son Henry Bolingbroke in Richard II is very similar to Celia's comment in As You Like It, when she says, "Now we go in content to liberty and not to banishment." We've also seen that forest settings are not uncommon in Shakespeare plays. We have Birnam Woods in Macbeth. In Titus Andronicus, Lavinia's rape and mutilation takes place in the forest. In Two Gentlemen of Verona, the play ends with most of the characters meeting up in the forest near Milan. In Henry IV Part 2, we have the infamous betrayal of Prince John of Lancaster in the forest of Gautreks, and of course a great deal of the action takes place in A Midsummer Night's Dream in the fairy-ridden Athenian forest. There's also a lot of contests in Shakespeare's plays, usually for honor, as in Richard II, bragging rights, as in Hamlet, and in the case of The Merchant of Venice, The Two Noble Kinsmen, and Pericles, Prince of Tyre, it's to win the hand of a lady. Adam, the elderly and loyal servant to two generations of the Du Bois family, saves his earnings to give it to Orlando so that he can serve him, much as Flavius does in Timon of Athens when Timon loses everything. And let's not forget Jaques, another melancholy fellow like Hamlet or Orsino in Twelfth Night. When we get back, we'll look at some of the interesting facts from As You Like It. In doing the research for this episode, I came across some interesting facts I want to share with you. Shakespeare's original source for As You Like It comes from Rosalind, or Euphros's Golden Legacy, a novel by Thomas Lodge published in 1590. Shakespeare chose As You Like It for his title because he believed this is how we would all like the world to be if wishes came true. Shakespeare chose his characters' names very purposely for this play. Rosalind means lovely rose, Celia means heavenly, Aliena means the lost one, and Du Bois comes from the French du bois and means of the woods. The majority of the play takes place in the Forest of Arden. William Shakespeare's mother's last name was also Arden. She was the youngest of 8 daughters of Robert Arden, who fought in the War of the Roses, and her husband John was a courtier of Henry VII. The family could trace its ancestry back to the Norman conquest. Although there is a Forest of Arden in Warwickshire, England, not far from where Shakespeare grew up, the play actually takes place in a northeastern area of France in the ancient Forest of Ardennes, which borders Belgium, Luxembourg, and Germany. So, where are there lions in France? Believe it or not, more than 50 European lions have been discovered in the countries of southern Europe, including Greece and France. But it's important to also remember that like the seacoast of Bohemia in The Winter's Tale, Shakespeare's Forest of Arden is supposed to be a place of the imagination and sometimes defies reality. When Rosalind tells Celia that her love hath an unknown bottom, like the Bay of Portugal, she's most likely referring to an area between Oporto and Sintra, where only 40 miles offshore, the depths can reach 14,000 fathoms or 8,400 feet deep, which in Shakespeare's day certainly would have been considered unfathomable. Several critics consider Rosalind's comments about Phoebe to be racist as she attacks her black silky hair and black bugle eyes, but I think they simply missed the boat on this one. They seem to be reading too deeply into the fact that this is just a good old-fashioned catfight and Rosalind is only using the attributes she sees in front of her to put Phoebe in her place. After all, having black hair did not hurt the appearances of Demi Moore, Gabrielle Union, Katie Holmes, Angela Bassett, Jennifer Hudson, Jessica Alba, or Gal Gadot. And let's face it, the uninhibited Rosalind would have no trouble holding her own against blondes, brunettes, or redheads when it comes to defending true lovers in the forest. And finally, David Prowse, who plays Charles the Wrestler in the 1978 version of As You Like It, also played Darth Vader in episodes 4, 5, and 6 of the Star Wars series. When we return, we'll look at some of the other great actors in the 1978 BBC Shakespeare version of As You Like It. All right, now let's take a look at some of the actors in the 1978 BBC Shakespeare version of As You Like It. The magnificent Helen Mirren, who plays Rosalind, also played Titania in A Midsummer Night's Dream in 1981 and Imogen in Cymbeline in 1982. Richard Pascoe, who plays Jaques, also played Brutus in Julius Caesar in 1979. James Bolam, who plays Touchtone, also played Porter in Macbeth in 1983. Richard Easton, who plays Duke Frederick, also plays Constable Charles Delabref in Kenneth Branagh's Henry V in 1989. Tony Church, who plays Duke Sr., also played Prologue in Henry VIII in 1979. David Lloyd Meredith, who plays Corin, also played several parts in The Life and Adventures of Nicholas Nickleby in 1982 and the Governor of Harfleur in Kenneth Branagh's Henry V in 1989. Arthur Hewlett, who plays Adam, also played the priest in Twelfth Night in 1980 and Shepherd in The Winter's Tale in 1981. Geoffrey Holland, who plays William, also played the Duke of Surrey in Richard II in 1978 and Corporal Nym in Henry V in 1979. I also encourage you to check out the 2006 Kenneth Branagh version of As You Like It, which features Bryce Dallas Howard playing an excellent Rosalind, Al Molina as a terrific Touchtone, and Kevin Kline as Jaques. In addition, Kenneth Branagh used some of his excellent regulars, including Brian Blessed, who plays both Dukes, Richard Briers, who plays Adam, Richard Clifford, who plays LeBeau, Jimmy Ewell as Corin, and Patrick Doyle as Amiens. By the way, Patrick Doyle did an excellent job on the music in this production, so don't miss it. Now stay tuned for today's trivia challenge called Famous Feast Days. All right, now it's time for today's trivia challenge, which is called Famous Feast Days. On what feast days did these events take place in the following plays? Number 1, the execution of the Duke of Buckingham in Richard III. Number 2, King John delivers up his crown in The Life and Death of King John. And number 3, Henry V's troops win the Battle of Agincourt in Henry V. When we get back, I'll have the answers for you, along with some relevant lessons from As You Like It. All right, let's see how you did on today's trivia challenge called Famous Feast Days. On what feast days did these events take place in the following plays? Number 1, the execution of the Duke of Buckingham in Richard III. That was on All Souls Day, as he wanted. Number 2, King John delivers up his crown in the life and death of King John. That took place on Ascension Day before noon, as was prophesied. And number 3, Henry V's troops win the Battle of Agincourt in Henry V. That took place on St. Crispin's Day. Now let's take a look at some relevant lessons from As You Like It. First, take the opportunity to examine who you really are. As we've seen with these characters, once they retreated to the forest, their true selves were exposed. Perhaps it's time that you went on a retreat and did a little self-examination of your own. Second, when you find someone you love, make sure you let them know. Had Orlando been less tongue-tied after his wrestling match, he could have saved himself a great deal of love sickness while longing for Rosalind. And finally, even if you are an adult, it's still okay to play sometimes. Make sure you're leaving yourself enough time to enjoy your life, and don't wait until you hit your second childishness to do so. I'm Dave Romeo, and thank you for watching this episode of Romeo and Shakespeare. Please join me next time when a war hero is banished because he can't adapt to political life and threatens to sack Rome, including his mother, son, and wife.